Se puso a decir que me va a dar una lección de boxeo y me hizo recordar a ñato Marcel en Panamá, pero yo no creo que Buchanan me gane a mí.
Roberto Durán wasn't the biggest, nor was he the fastest, but he fought like a man who refused to know limits. From Panama's rough streets to the brightest lights in boxing, Roberto Durán carved a legend with iron fists and an unbreakable will. He battled the greatest names of his era, defied the odds, and left behind a career full of triumph, heartbreak, and controversy. This is the unforgettable story of Hands of Stone. In the early 1970s, boxing was overflowing with talent, but every so often, a fighter came along who simply couldn't be overlooked. One of those rare figures was Roberto Durán. Durán burst out of Panama with fire in his chest, a style built on pure grit and aggression, and fists so heavy they earned him the nickname Manos de Piedra, Spanish for Hands of Stone. Early on, few expected much from him, but Durán was never one to live by anyone else's predictions, which was clear because by the time he retired, he wasn't just a champion, he was a legend. After turning pro in the late 1960s, Durán's career breakthrough arrived at Madison Square Garden on June 26, 1972, when he went toe-to-toe with Ken Buchanan. Ken Buchanan was the reigning lightweight champion from Scotland, known for his polished boxing skills and confidence. On paper, Buchanan was too experienced for a young fighter like Durán, yet from the opening bell, he made it clear that this fight would be nothing like what Buchanan was used to. He charged forward with relentless pressure, never letting up or allowing Buchanan a moment to breathe. Early into the fight, Buchanan was knocked down, and this stunned the crowd, who had believed their champion was untouchable. The fight turned into a war of attrition as Buchanan tried to box, tried to use his jab and footwork to slow the onslaught. However, Durán kept charging forward. Round after round, the Panamanian stalked him, landing heavy shots, and by the 13th round, Buchanan had endured enough damage, forcing the referee to stop the fight, awarding Durán a technical knockout. In that fateful moment, the underdog had done the unthinkable. At 29-0, with 25 knockouts already to his name, Durán was now the lightweight champion of the world, and Panama celebrated a new national hero. Durán joined a line of Panamanian world champions and quickly became the most fearsome among them. This fight in New York was more than just a title win. Durán had made an unforgettable mark. He wasn't going to sneak into history. Instead, he was going to kick the doors down. Durán ruled the lightweight division for the next 6 years, and his title defenses were anything but cautious. He defended the crown a total of 12 times, often brutally, leaving challengers broken and discouraged. What defined him wasn't only his power, but his relentlessness, because Durán didn't fight to score points. He fought to overwhelm, dominate, and to make opponents question whether they even belonged in the ring or simply made a bad decision by coming into the ring to put up a challenge. However, every champion finds his great rival, and for Durán, that rival was Esteban de Jesus of Puerto Rico. Their first meeting came on November 17, 1972, only months after Durán had captured the lightweight crown. But de Jesus wasted no time making his mark. He caught Durán with a clean left hook in the very first round and dropped him. The moment stunned fans because they had started to believe Durán was unstoppable. Though de Jesus would go on to win that fight by decision, what made their rivalry special was the events that unfolded afterwards. Durán didn't just throw in the towel after tasting defeat. Instead, he came back stronger, and that loss lit a fire that would define the next stage of his career. The rematch on March 16, 1974, was everything boxing fans could have hoped for. Both men had grown, both were sharper, and the stakes were higher than ever. This time, Durán showed the world that he had learned from their first meeting. He pressured de Jesus with precision and ferocity, but he wasn't reckless, and as the fight stretched into the later rounds, Durán began to break him down piece by piece. By the 12th round, it was clear the tide had turned, And as Durán landed a brutal combination that sent De Jesus to the canvas, the fight was stopped. It was a knockout that didn't just avenge a loss, it unified the World Boxing Association and World Boxing Council lightweight titles, cementing Durán's place as the undisputed king of the division. In January 21, 1978, they had another rematch, making it their third fight, and it was another brutal encounter where Durán emerged victorious again, finally closing the chapter on one of the greatest rivalries in lightweight history. These battles with De Jesus didn't just build Durán's legacy, they revealed his character. He had been humbled, but instead of shrinking from the challenge and licking his wounds, he turned his setbacks into fuel. This hunger and refusal to be broken became the mark of his career. By the time he left the lightweight division after his 1978 unification win, Durán's record was roughly 62-1, and he had established himself as the division's dominant force with only a handful of losses, most of them early setbacks that only shaped him into a sharper, more dangerous fighter. No one questioned his dominance anymore, and the underdog from Panama had become a champion who seemed destined for greatness far beyond 135 pounds. What made Durán's story so compelling wasn't just the numbers, though they were staggering. It was his style. He fought like a man who carried the weight of his country on his shoulders. He fought with an intensity that bordered on feral. Every punch was thrown with bad intentions. Every exchange was meant to break not only the body, but the spirit of whoever stood across from him. At the same time, there was artistry in his aggression. He slipped punches, rolled with shots, and cut off the ring with the instincts of a natural fighter. Watching him in those years was to see controlled chaos at its finest. However, Durán's rise at lightweight was only the beginning. The boxing world knew the real test would come when he moved up to face bigger men in higher weight classes, but his accomplishments between 1972 and 1979 remains one of the most dominant stretches any fighter has ever had. By the time he stepped away from lightweight, fans and experts alike already knew they were witnessing something incredible. Durán wasn't just another champion who held a belt for a few years. He was rewriting what it meant to be a lightweight. He had transformed from a hungry kid from El Chorrillo into a figure who carried an entire nation's pride and inspired future fighters to believe that no stage was too big. The next chapters of his career would take him through some of the most iconic fights in boxing history. But those early years laid the foundation. They showed the world that Roberto Durán wasn't going to fade away after a moment of glory. He was there to stay. And as the 1970s came to a close, one question lingered in the air. If Durán could dominate lightweights with such ferocity, what would happen when he dared to climb higher, into divisions filled with even bigger, stronger men? Durán had conquered lightweight with fury and finesse, but destiny was calling him higher. Ahead lay bigger men, greater risks, and the legendary battles that would etch his name among the Four Kings. By 1980, Roberto Durán had already secured his place as one of the greatest lightweights in history, but true legends are never known to stay satisfied with one conquest. The same hunger that carried him from the streets of Panama to the lightweight throne now drove him toward a new frontier, the welterweights. Moving up meant facing bigger, stronger, faster men, and at that time, the division was ruled by fighters who would come to define an era: Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Thomas Hearns, and Durán himself. Together, their names would be etched forever into the fabric of boxing history as the Four Kings. Durán's first great welterweight moment came on June 20th, 1980, in Montreal, Canada. Across the ring from him stood Sugar Ray Leonard, undefeated and dazzling, the darling of American boxing. Leonard was everything Durán was not: flashy, smooth, polished, a gold medal Olympian with the smile of a star. Many believed Leonard would simply outclass the older Panamanian who had made his name terrorizing lightweights. However, from the opening bell, the fight told a different story. Durán brought the storm. He came forward with a fury that Leonard had never faced before. Every time Leonard tried to circle or jab, Durán was there, cutting off the ring, hammering him to the body, taunting him with gestures and glares. It was a fight that turned into a brawl, and Durán thrived perfectly in that chaos. Round after round, Leonard found himself dragged into a war of wills, and the crowd in Montreal roared as both men exchanged. But it was Durán who dictated the terms. After 15 grueling rounds, the judges gave a unanimous decision to Durán, and the upset shook the foundations of the boxing world. He had dethroned an undefeated champion in his prime, claiming the WBC welterweight title. For many, it was the crowning achievement of his career, proof that his power and grit could travel up in weight. As glorious as that night was, boxing fans refused to allow the rivalry to end there. 5 months later, on November 25, 1980, Durán and Leonard met again in the Superdome in New Orleans. The rematch became one of the most infamous fights ever staged. Leonard, having learned from their first meeting, changed his strategy completely, and instead of trading with Durán, he boxed smart, moved constantly, and showboated, smiling and taunting as he peppered Durán with quick combinations. This time, Leonard refused to be drawn into a brawl, and when they got to the 8th round, Durán, who was both frustrated and drained at this point, stunned the world. He turned to the referee, shook his head, and said the words that would haunt him for years. No mas, meaning no more. Leonard was declared the winner by TKO, and the legend of no mas was born. For most fighters, that kind of surrender might have spelled the end, because quitting on the biggest stage could have destroyed a career. But Durán was no ordinary fighter. His reputation took a hit, but he refused to disappear. Nearly a decade later, on December 7, 1989, the rivalry came full circle when he and Leonard met again in Las Vegas for a rubber match. By then, both were older, wiser, and carrying the scars of long campaigns. Leonard fought cautiously, outboxing Durán over 12 rounds to claim the super middleweight title, sealing the rivalry at 2 wins to 1 in his favor. Despite those losses, Durán's first victory over Leonard remains one of the defining moments of the Four Kings era. But Leonard wasn't the only mountain Durán tried to climb. In 1983, Durán moved up once more, this time to challenge Marvin Hagler for the undisputed middleweight championship. Hagler was a force of nature, one of the most feared champions in boxing history, and few believed Durán stood a chance, but they were all in for a big surprise. Instead of relying only on his trademark aggression, Durán fought with patience and precision, turning the bout into a tactical chess match. For 12 rounds, he held his own, outthinking as much as outfighting. In the end, Hagler's size and stamina proved decisive, and he retained the title by unanimous decision. Still, it went down as one of the closest fights of Hagler's career, with Hagler himself later admitting that Durán had given him one of his toughest nights. Durán's run against the Three Kings reached its harshest moment in 1984 when he faced Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Hearns was tall and rangy guy who could hit with a right hand that could end a fight in an instant. Durán, giving up significant height and reach, tried to close the distance, but this time, his pressure met a wall of will and firepower. Hearns caught him clean in the second round and finished him with a devastating knockout. It was a brutal ending, one that showed the dangers of a smaller man daring to face the giants of higher divisions, but even that defeat didn't erase Durán's legacy among the Four Kings. In fact, his willingness to face each of them, win or lose, became a badge of honor. He wasn't content with safe fights or easy defenses. Instead, he sought out the best, time after time, and in doing so, he became part of the mythos of that golden era. Few fighters in history can say they fought Leonard, Hagler, and Hearns, and even fewer still can say they beat one of them at their peak. Durán's brief reign as WBA light middleweight champion in June 16, 1983, when he dismantled Davey Moore in New York, also added to his legend, because that fight, fought in front of a roaring Madison Square Garden crowd, showed that even after no mas, Durán still had greatness in him. He dominated Moore, knocking him down and forcing the referee to stop the fight in the 8th round. The performance reminded everyone that the old lion still had plenty of bite. Looking back, the Four Kings era wasn't defined by who won the most or who lost the least. It was defined by the willingness of these fighters to face each other again and again at the height of their powers. Duran's record among them may not have been perfect, but his place in their company is secure. He brought a ferocity and toughness that tested Leonard, Hagler, and Hearns in ways they never forgot. For Duran, the welterweight years were about more than titles. They were about proving that the lightweight champion from Panama could stand in the same ring with the biggest names of his time and make them fight for every inch. He had come from nothing, carved his legend with his fists, and earned the right to be forever mentioned alongside Leonard, Hagler, and Hearns. The wars with Leonard, Hagler, and Hearns defined Duran's era, but his story didn't end there. Beyond the Four Kings, other rivalries sparked one burning question: who was truly the toughest? Other notable rivalries. Who was really the toughest? When people reflect on Roberto Duran's career, the spotlight often falls on the three kings he battled: Leonard, Hagler, and Hearns. Their names are inseparable from his story, but beyond those marquee showdowns, Duran forged rivalries that were every bit as grueling, and in some ways, even more personal. If the three kings elevated him to global stardom, it was fighters like Esteban de Jesus, Ken Buchanan, and the always discussed Alexis Arguello, who sharpened his edge and tested his limits in ways fans still passionately debate today. Take Esteban de Jesus. Their three fights unfolded like chapters of violence, revenge, and redemption that defined Roberto Duran's rise. The first meeting, on November 17, 1972, was a humbling night. Esteban de Jesus caught Duran early with a perfectly timed left hook, sending shockwaves through the arena. For the first time, the unstoppable Panamanian looked vulnerable. De Jesus went on to win a unanimous decision, handing Duran his first professional loss. This defeat burned like a scar, fueling a grudge that could only be settled in the ring. And when the rematch came on March 16, 1974, Duran fought like a man possessed. He battered de Jesus and stopped him, reclaiming not just victory, but his pride. The final chapter arrived on January 21, 1978, and with the lightweight crown on the line, Duran's ferocity overwhelmed de Jesus, forcing the fight to end at the 12th round. These fights didn't just make headlines, they hardened Duran, reshaping him into the legend who would conquer even greater challenges. Alexis Arguello deserves mention too. The Nicaraguan legend was a master technician, tall for the lightweight division, with a piston-like jab and concussive power in both hands. Where Duran thrived on chaos, Arguello excelled in control. He was patient, surgical, and carried himself with an icy composure that broke opponents long before the knockout punch landed. Talk of a Duran-Arguello showdown swirled throughout the mid-1970s, a matchup fans and pundits believed could decide not just a champion, but the very identity of the greatest lightweight of the era. On one side stood Duran, the ferocious mauler who walked men down and drowned them in pressure. On the other, Arguello, the elegant assassin who punished mistakes with ruthless precision. The fight, however, never materialized as politics, promoters, and the shifting landscape of weight divisions conspired to keep them apart. Instead, the two men went their separate ways. Duran tore through the lightweight division and later shocked the world by beating Sugar Ray Leonard at welterweight. Arguello, meanwhile, climbed weight class after weight class, winning world titles in 3 different divisions. They never shared a ring, but their names are forever linked by the question fans still ask: what if? Would Arguello's height, jab, and patience have been enough to hold off Duran's relentless storm? Or would Duran's fire and pressure have broken down even a master like Arguello? This mystery has only added to the legend of both men. Ken Buchanan was the man Duran had to beat to make his name, and their fight on June 26, 1972, at Madison Square Garden did just that. Durán won the lightweight crown with a 13-round stoppage, but it was no easy night. Buchanan's sharp jab and tight defense frustrated Durán, forcing him to fight for every opening. Even in defeat, the Scotsman earned Durán's respect. Years later, Durán would still praise Buchanan, calling him one of the best defensive fighters and one of the best jabbers he had ever faced. It was proof that boxing skill is not just punching power. It could leave a lasting mark on a fighter's career. These rivalries raise a fierce question on who was truly the toughest opponent Durán ever faced. Answers vary by what you value. If toughness equals durability, Marvin Hagler often gets the nod because Durán pushed him hard in 1983, but Hagler's chin and relentlessness never wavered. If toughness means the power to humble and transform Durán, Esteban de Jesus stakes a strong claim, and if toughness means the opponent who frustrated and outboxed him, Buchanan belongs in the conversation. If you measure by the opponent who left the deepest mark on Durán's legacy, Sugar Ray Leonard's trilogy is impossible to ignore. Durán himself gave different answers at different times, sometimes naming Leonard for the way he impressed him, sometimes praising others for their unique challenges. And maybe that's the point. A career as vast as Durán's can't be reduced to one single toughest name, because each of these men tested him in different ways. Each left a visible or hidden scar, and together they shaped the fighter the world remembers. Roberto Durán's story is full of glory, heartbreak, and unforgettable rivalries, but who truly tested him the most? Was it Leonard's brilliance, Hagler's iron chin, de Jesus's ferocity, or Buchanan's skill? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.